Hey guys, how's everyone doing? I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Others can join if they're late. So I hope y'all are doing well. Hope y'all are keeping warm. Uh, Anybody else get their gas bill this week? I mean, it is brutal. It's been a brutal January. I have to take out a second mortgage on my home just to pay my gas bill. Um, but listen, today we're going to go through um, negotiations. And the reason I'm doing this class is because one of our realtors made a suggestion that there was a need and that it would be a great topic for one of our Thursday meetings. And so all that to say that if any of you all have any other suggestions on other training topics, please let me know. I am always looking for content and suggestions, and it's what I like to do anyway. So feel free. Um, there will be some audience participation towards the end. So be thinking about situations that you can call to memory that were difficult for you in negotiations. So we're going to talk through a little bit about that as well. Um, the uh, the thing that I know is that amongst all of us, we're all kind of hardwired differently from each other, right? And when we talk about the word negotiation, especially on behalf of a real estate agent, I know that a visual comes to your mind. And it might be of a bully, it might be of someone that took a softer approach. And if you think that you have to be a bully or you have to be forceful, and there isn't multiple ways to negotiate for your client what they want and get a positive outcome without having to be that way. There are, and we're going to cover those today. Um, I wanted to point out that, well, let me go back. For those of us that have kids, if we don't think we're good negotiators, I mean, think back about the millions of times we've had to negotiate with our kids from like age 0 to it's probably still going on. But in the arena of negotiations, when it comes to uh, real estate agents, this is a recent survey. It's actually almost about time to review this again, but this was last year's. And just to call out how important clients think this is for us, look in the upper right hand corner. What buyers want most from real estate agents? 48%, so almost half, want us to find the right home. A quarter are really concerned about helping them with negotiations, right? So it is a big deal. And I think that when it comes to these kinds of surveys, um, sometimes, especially if they're first time home buyers, they really don't know how important some of these things are. So I think a lot of this is understated because this would suggest that 75% of all buyers last year didn't value negotiation, although I'm betting that you did some for them. So that being said, I think the number's higher. So let's go through um, effective negotiation techniques. And I'm going to call this prepare, cooperate, and execute. So if that title doesn't set the tone from, for what lens I personally see negotiations as, I don't know what does, right? So prepare, cooperate, execute. So why does this matter? Well, it's obvious that this will build trust and credibility with clients. It kind of presents this, hey, I'm on your side, I'm your biggest advocate mentality. In the world of NAR settlements and I can't get my commission to what I want it to be, or my client doesn't value what I do. Um, this is the one controllable that you have that will instantly demonstrate your value and shift the balance of power. Not in a bad way. But what I mean by that is that if you just acquire a buyer and you're winging it and you just kind of let the transaction unfold as naturally will, there's a chance that the buyer, if you're not a good negotiator or you don't demonstrate that, that they're going to take over, and you just don't want that to happen, because what are you there for? So aside from access to the MLS and finding the right home, which was 48%, by the way. Um, it's this that we can control and continue to get good at that really is going to set us apart. Um, it will ensure a smoother transaction. It will set you apart from others because if you have strong negotiation skills, you're going to lead with purpose, power, and a sense of urgency. So the psychology of negotiation. So if you know anything about me on a lot of these things, I like to delve into, mentally what is behind people's behavior. And so I think that, like all of us, clients don't want to be taken advantage of. And look, even if you're not a first-time home buyer, and this presentation is largely from a buyer's perspective because there's so many forks in the road that we have to negotiate for them, right? So I will talk about sellers a little bit, but for the most part, it's going to be buyers. So even if you're not a first-time home buyer, chances are that you haven't been in this process for probably the past 10 or 12 years. And so there's a lot of uncertainty there. And you're the one leading the charge. You're the one who they've put their trust in. And so they just don't want to feel like they're getting ripped off, right? And everyone wants to feel like they're getting a deal, right? You don't want to pay retail for anything. I was told decades ago that when I was in my 20s and about to buy a furniture to furnish my brand new home, that was going to run me a couple of $1,000s. And a trusted friend said, look, why the more you spend on something, the more wiggle room there is. Like, why aren't you asking for something? And that's going to be their mentality, right? Some people just like the thrill of this. I mean, if I'm being fully transparent, part of the reason why I got into real estate, like I love this part of it. I love the back and forth, and your clients sometimes like that too. But be mindful that sometimes you're kind of left with asking, well, to what end? Like, what's the end goal here? Like, I get that you want to feel like you're a big wheeler dealer, but what's really going on? Now, some people will over negotiate because they're looking for an excuse to not move forward. And they don't want to have that difficult conversation with you, right? And you really need to be on your guard about this because this is extremely common, right? They're looking for any excuse. And I think the best approach is transparency and say, look, if you are feeling conflicted on any level, let me let you off the hook. Let's just maybe pause. We'll revisit this later. And then, man, beware of first-time home buyers or really anybody who's watching HGTV, because those shows are painting a horrifically unrealistic picture about how this works. Right? Am I right on that? I mean, these shows are our worst enemy. Maybe a close second to Zillow, but yeah. So there's a difference between negotiation and TikTok. Amen. There's a difference between negotiation and persuasion. So negotiation, and this is probably one of the key points of today, it's always going to result in a win-win outcome. Someone's going to give, someone's going to get. Other side's going to give, other side's going to get. But everyone involved needs to be flexible. and know that they will have to give something to get something in return. Now, persuasion is it's my way or the highway. And I've mentioned this before. If the other agent has experienced some heartache with their client and that client doesn't see their value, a lot of times that agent will try and push the envelope in this area to prove their worth. And that results a lot of times in bullying, right? So I want us to focus on what my preference would be, which would be negotiation, not persuasion. All right. Because there are three versions to every story: person one, person two, and then the truth. Right. So you got to respect how people are hardwired and just simply meet them where they are. So if you are naturally aggressive and your client isn't, that might be a problem. If your client is holding back and not really being transparent about what they want and what they think success is going to look like, you got to draw that out of them, right? But you know, negotiation in a real estate transaction, it usually happens in the first 7 days. Why? That's price, that's inspection reports, that's all the things that need to happen before your lender takes over. It is not for the faint of heart. You know, sometimes clients don't know what they want, or they're too afraid to ask. So, the key principles of effective negotiation: prepare thoroughly. So, this is the data driven portion of our jobs. Research the market, the property, all the parties involved. And if you ever get stuck, just use the contract as a template for what is about to happen. All right. So if you pull out that 11-page 1-to-4 family, lots of forks in the road that can be negotiable, right? A lot of it. A lot of it. So the worst thing that can happen is for you all to be caught off guard by some point in the process or contract that the client has decided to fixate on, right? You've got to assume that they're going to fixate on all of it until they prove otherwise. So again, focus on win-win outcomes. All right. And you will need to give to get always. Stay calm, professional, and as impartial as possible. Right. So calm heads prevail. There was this metaphor I read on social media the other day that it said, did you know that you can never see your reflection in a pot of boiling water, but when it settles and stops boiling, you can see clearly, that clarity. And it was a metaphor for what I'm talking about. If this this is one area where you do not want to match your client's level of intensity. If they are getting highly emotional, you gotta stay calm, because no good decision is going to come from a high emotional state. All right. So here is the one key to this entire presentation today. Ask your client, what does success look like? And this has got to happen before you look at one home. Now, I know that things will change and you'll have to pivot based on the home that you're looking at. But that's what a buyer's consultation is for. If you're not having those, you're asking for heartache, because they need to know up front that there is no perfect home, and these are the 10 things that we can negotiate. What does that look like to you? But if for some reason you get sucker punched and you didn't think that they were going to care about, the paint of the door jamb on the front door, but all of a sudden they're fixating on it, ask them. And especially when you leave the home and it's one that you're going to put in an offer on, ask them, what What does success look like to you? There is no perfect home, but see yourself moving into this home right now. These are the things that we can negotiate. What does that look like to you? Because how else are you going to know? Right? You cannot figure this out as you're going along. So, techniques. Um, Verbalize. In other words, set your own expectation. And you might have to repeat this over and over and over again that you want a win win for your client. And you may have to explain what that means. The seller gets something, you get something. Seller gives up something, you give up something. And then this acronym BATNA, Best Alternative Approach to a Negotiated Agreement. This is just a fancy way of saying have a plan B. So when you're ready to make an offer, that's going to look like something, right? And most agents, and I don't disagree, will ask for everything in the kitchen sink and just wait to be countered. And we'll talk about what that might look like in a second. But it's likely that you're not going to get everything that you ask for. And that needs to be communicated to your client. And so once you do that, what's a plan B? All right. I know that you don't have any money for closing costs and you're going to need some. What if the 10 grand you're asking for is not going to happen? Would 5 be okay? Would 3 be okay? Because they're going to push back on that probably. All right. So have a plan B. Anchoring and framing. So this is a classic technique where you say, hey, I want these 20 things, knowing that you're going to get 10 of them. But it's better to start out reasonably strong, than to start adding on afterwards. Because we've seen that happen. Still in the option period, something pops up that's never come up before. Well, I want a lease back. Well, I want those curtains. Well, the option period expires in a day. Why didn't this come up before? Well, I just thought of it. Well, too bad. So go in strong and bargain from there. So active listening. Pay attention and ask clarifying questions. And this takes practice, but you can't just go off of what the client tells you without asking them to clarify and to repeat themselves, because you want to be 100% positive that when you go to the well, you're only going once. Okay. You don't want to have to keep going back over and over and over again. And then use silence as a tool, whether it be with your client or the other agent. And then, get this theory of trade-offs in the client's mindset before you even go see a home. Be ready to give to get, but only if there's something of value being exchanged, right? So I'm not saying just cave, but certain aspects of a transaction mean certain things to people, and I would offer they mean certain things to people on day one versus closing. Maybe you gotta, even in writing, you got the fact that the refrigerator was going to stay, and the buyer moves in, the refrigerator's gone. Well, that really wasn't that big of a deal. I've seen the opposite happen too, but there's got to be a give and take. So what are some negotiating styles? Well, you can either be competitive or collaborative. What is going to guarantee a win-win outcome? It's going to be collaborative, right? Got to work with the other side, right? And then to the best of your ability, determine who you're dealing with on the other side too, right? Is the agent experienced? Are they not experienced? Do they really understand what their seller wants? Are they responsive? Are they overly combative? That type of deal. All right. So, I think that a lot of times our lack of confidence in negotiating is because we don't know what to say and we don't have all the facts or a strategy. So, we kind of lose confidence. And I think that comes from not being prepared. So, when we're going to run through what things we can negotiate in a second. But now, listen, you may have to determine whether or not to cut someone loose if they're simply being too unreasonable, right? So there's a limit. There are bumpers, right? And if it just seems like logic has been exhausted after multiple times, it may be time to cut them loose. So, Ariana, you put it great the other day when you said, a client may be financially able to buy a home, but are they emotionally and psychologically able to buy that home? Right. And you run into this a lot with first time home buyers. Do they really understand how this works? Right. Being qualified is one thing, but being able to actually close and not sabotage this own process for you is another thing. So let's talk about common challenges. Low offers. Right? So your buyer wants to submit a ridiculously low offer. So I think in the spirit of offering up some things that you could say, and this is my language, not yours, so you may have to rephrase it in your own voice, but you may say, let me present this and see what they say. However, can I ask you how you came up with that number? Right. And then leave that open ended, of course. Right. And just maybe follow up by saying, so think about this. If you were the seller and this offer came over to you, you might agree that the offer could come across as insulting and a waste of their time. Just saying. Right. And they always don't have to respond, meaning the seller. Now, the agent has to respond to you within 2 days. Right. But all they need to do is say, seller didn't accept your offer. So why set that tone early? Now, I'm all about going in strong, but I'm talking about, 90% of asking price. I mean, no house in the state is getting less than 95. So, if you don't push back on this, it's not going to end well, right? So, in this example, you're not only negotiating with the seller, you're negotiating with your client. Okay. Other things, maybe they have some unrealistic expectations. And so educate the clients using market analysis. All right. So maybe they don't understand what price is appropriate. And so maybe you say something like, I'm your biggest advocate and I will present this to the other side. But let's talk about what their likely response will be and come up with some alternatives to what the worst case scenario could be. So let's say that the price is $400,000 and you want me to offer $350. They're likely going to push back on that. What if they counter back, because it's only been on the market for 3 days, by the way, with full price? What do you want to do? And I'm just preparing you for what might happen. Right? That way, you kind of knock them down a peg and make them think, well, wait a second, maybe I can't get all this. And hey, if they double down on that and say it's my way or the highway, well, that's going to be pretty revealing to you.
Brad, I have a question.
Yes.
So, if it's a first-time buyer or buyer who has come out from a different part of the country or something, and they don't know the market, they might just think, "Oh, this is a good enough offer," and they might literally think that, right? Or genuinely believe that. Now, as a realtor, should we tell them, for example, in the example you gave, 400, 350 is not going to be a reasonable offer. We can make the offer, but you're likely not going to get anything out of this. Uh, if you're not ready to make a reasonable offer, should we just forget this and focus our time on something that you really love, right? Or if you really love this, I think a reasonable offer would be 425. For example, should you give them a suggestion or a number? Or they would say, well, you told me to give that number and it turned out to be way too high or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So the way I approach that is that we can always get our hands on um, what homes sold for and
Mhm.
what percentage of the actual sales price was it from what was listed. And I think that what you'll find, so in the spirit of giving the buyer comps to make sure that they're not overpaying, you would want to give them the same comps because there's a column in there that says, at least on the solds, um, what percentage of the list price was the actual closing price. And if all of them say 98%, then calculate 98% of whatever home you're looking at and say, well, this is probably where we're going to land. We can start a little bit below this, but I'm afraid that your offer is going to be too low. And I would show them the data. And if they still disagree, then send over the offer. But those are the tools that we have to prove our point.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. So people that the sky is falling all the time, right? Emotionally charged clients. All right. So stay calm and focus on facts. So that's easier said than done because on all these scenarios, I don't know about y'all, but my first go-to emotion, like instantaneously, is you're out of your dadgum mind. And then a close second is I got to get rid of this guy. This isn't going to end well, right? But we can't do that within reason. But that's naturally kind of where I think our minds go, and this is amplified with someone that just is a walking nerve ending all the time, right? So stay calm and focus on facts and say, look, I completely hear you. Um, so let's say that it's the same example where it's 400,000 and your client wants you to offer 350 and the seller comes back and counters with 400,000 and that just sets your client off and it's 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You might say something like this: look, I completely hear you. um, this is to be expected. It probably couldn't hurt to sleep on this and revisit our response when we've kind of had time to digest it. What do you say? Right? Because a lot of times things will look a lot different in the light of day. Okay. So let's say that you've gone back and forth and the scenario you're faced with is a stalemate. Um, Introduce creative solutions to try and break deadlocks. And, this can just sap your energy, right? Um, Client asks you to get something for them. You think it's ridiculous. You go out and ask, you actually get it, only to find out they want something else or they want something different. Well, maybe you say something like, do you see a path forward? Right? Is this because we've gone back and forth several times? Do you see a path forward? What would that look like to you? All right. And remember, some people have different levels of tolerance for this. And so as I've always said, if it gets to a point where it's costing you your peace and you can't sleep at night, price is too high. Might have to cut them loose. Okay, because they're wasting your time and they're wasting the seller's time, because while this is all going on, seller's home is off the market usually, right? Um, Let me just look at some questions here. Oh yeah. Okay. Um, okay. So again, this is probably the third time that I've mentioned this. If you're really wondering what the secret is to all this, ask your client. Just ask them. And we're going to go through the different things that a buyer can negotiate, but you need to be calling out every single one. When I signed my commercial lease agreement for my Remax office like 6, 8 years ago, um, little did I know it was a kind of boilerplate typical lease. But my agent said, um, you should have a lawyer take a look at that. And so I did. And the document was probably 87 pages long. And he said, okay, well, this is pretty standard. You can certainly pick apart every single one of these things, and you can negotiate every single one of these things. But read this and you tell me what really matters. Okay. And our contract is no different. Some people may not care about the inspection, but they really care about how much earnest money they're going to put down, or the title policy, or maybe they're fixated on getting a home warranty. It, it's different things to different people. But this contract has been standard for decades. So this should be no surprise to you. So if you're not preemptively getting with your buyer client and saying, these are the things that we're going to talk about intimately in the next 2 weeks, read it and you tell me what is important to you. If you're not doing that, you are asking for heartache. You're asking for dysfunction, and you're asking for a lot of work for not a lot for no money. Okay? So buyers, outline all the things that are up for negotiation and communicate what's typical and fair in your experience. And you need to phrase it just like that. You need to remind them and re-remind them why they've hired you. And 99.9% of the time, they're not paying your commission anyway. So they're getting a lot for nothing. If they push back, ask them why that particular thing is important to them. Because every buyer will fixate on something. And the bad news is sometimes you never know what it is until it rears its ugly head. Right? And resist the urge to think that you're always trying to beat the clock. Because today's market, I'm sorry, but you have time. And if your buyer loses out on a deal because you wanted to pump the brakes because they were acting too hastily, well, maybe they're not the right client for you, or maybe you're not the right agent for them. But I would resist the urge to just ram an offer through just because you think you press for time. And you don't need to talk about these touch points within the contract, because something's going to suffer. All right. So prepare beforehand and review what exactly will be a big deal. And I would focus on repairs, because, man, there's a lot there. Everything else is pretty black and white. But, man, those inspectors find a lot of stuff, don't they? And again, there's nothing worse than being caught off guard by your client's desire to negotiate something that never came up before. All right. And even call that out during the buyer's consult. Say, look, and they may not know at that time, but at some point you got to get it on the table and say, look, these are the things that we can negotiate. What's important to you? So here they are: your commission, price of the home, earnest money option fee, option period, who pays for the seller's title policy, who pays for the survey, inspection and repairs, the closing date, lease back, seller credits, HOA docs, anything in the HOA docs, right? So um, here's some techniques on some of these various things that I mentioned in the previous screen. So if it's about price, again, Sudhir, this is a great point to your question. Um, Research what percentage of the list price that area is getting by doing a buyer CMA. So in summer, this is actually a follow up to something we wanted to talk about. Um, there was a time about 6, 7 years ago that one of the Trek rules was that we had to do a CMA for both a buyer and a seller, respectively, whatever client you're representing. And I even found it online. Well, when I went to go look at it on Trek's website, the rule had either moved or had been changed. And I think what it says now is that if you do a CMA, well, it doesn't say if, it says when you do a CMA, you have to retain that record for whatever it is, 4 years, right? So I've been working off an old Trek rule and, telling y'all that and making it mandatory and back agent, they have to do a CMA for buyers. I'm not going to back off of that. I think that for no other reason than to prove that the buyer is paying the fair price, you got to do one, right? But in doing that, the CMA also gives you a bunch of other stuff, right? Days on market, how much those other sold for, and what percentage of the list price that was. Because you can tell how this is going to end if everybody got 97, 98% of the list price and your buyer's asking for 90. Like that's ridiculous. So we've all like listed those distressed properties and an investor comes in, either independent or with a big company, and they offer half. Like, how can they sleep at night? Well, the answer is that all they have to get is one, right? So you'll get them. And some of your buyers fancy themselves as, Chip and Joanna or, $1 million listing, and they want to kick you around and make you do their dirty work and all, because it makes them feel good. Well, there's logic to this business, right? So make sure that the price is appropriate with what the market is getting. Your commission. I have some handouts that I'll show you in a second on our website that detail out exactly what we do to earn our commission. So you might want to refer to those. But I also know that each client is unique. And what I mean by that is that if they push back on your commission, first of all, 99.9% of the time, they're not going to write a check anyway, right? That still doesn't eliminate some of the apprehension. But let's say that they're an out of state buyer and they're only coming in twice between now and the time they need to be moved in. Aren't you going to be doing a heck of a lot more work for them to earn that commission than if it was your next door neighbor? Probably, right? So you can use these handouts and they're under the buyer seller leases tab, kind of towards the top. So here's the top. And there are these two files called buyer value proposition. If you ever get stuck for things that support why you get paid what you get paid, they're all right here. All right. But again, each client might be unique. Earnest money option fee. So I would start with 1% as earnest money and 250 for an option fee and go from there. Right. I think that the days of $100, $150 option fee, is that enough for the seller to keep their home off the market and give you just the unrestricted right to wake up one day and just not want the house? Probably not. Right. So um, the sales price may dictate what this is, right? For that exact reason. So is 1% even enough on $1 million home? It may be, it may not be. But that seller's taking their home off the market while you try and figure out your finances. And if something goes south, then and the seller is actually entitled to the earnest money, is what you're giving them enough? Right? What amount is fair for the seller to keep? Because they're going to take their home off the market if something goes wrong. Seller title policy or survey. So these are my go-to items whenever a buyer wants to know what other levers can I pull to make sure that I make my offer strong enough, right? Um, and because these are big ticket items. Seller policy, 1.25% of the price of the home usually. Survey, if there is none, $800 minimum. And so the buyer may offer to pick up the costs here in exchange for something else. So in the spirit of negotiation, this is a good lever to pull if the buyer wants seller credits, or if they want a bunch of money as a credit to go towards repairs, right? Because this creates heartache for a seller because it's a lot of money. Okay. Let me just look at. Okay. All right. So inspection and repairs. All right. Because this is where the wheels fall off the bus a lot of times. Explain upfront that there is no perfect house, right? The perfect house doesn't exist, even if it's a new build. So go into this, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, expecting some kind of defect, right? There's going to be something that you don't like. What I would focus on is the roof, foundation, hot water heater, HVAC system intact, because that will prevent livability. Right? Everything else is going to be cosmetic. If previous owners had a dog and the dog chewed a windowsill, is that a deal breaker? I mean, there aren't that many homes in the market. So think about that. You got to explain the inspector's role. All right. So even if the home is brand new, even if this were a builder spec home and you hired an inspector to go in there, they're going to find stuff. And you need to tell your buyer that. They're going to find stuff. But you always have to think about, as you're thumbing through those pages, scale of 1 to 10, scale of 1 to 10. How big of a deal is this? Scale of 1 to 10. How big of a deal is this? And I would create the boundaries for what is typical to ask for. And oh, by the way, windows ain't it. Windows always come up, but they rarely get replaced. Right? Usually the seller will just throw money at you because it's too much of a pain, but they always come up. Just FYI. Ask them to make a wish list based on the inspection report, right? So here's this 80-page report, and encourage them, read it 2 or 3 times, because as you read through it, that crack in the foundation or the brick actually might not be a result of foundation issues. Like, read what the guy put. It may actually not end up being a big deal. So ask them to make a wish list. Then ask them to narrow it down. Okay. Just protocol wise, especially y'all that have represented a listing before, there's a limit in your mind. I know there is, as to how many items you expect to see on a buyer's request for repairs. And once that exceeds that amount, you just become furious. So if you represent the buyer, that needs to be the same mindset, right? So I'm thinking more than 5 or 6 is excessive and insulting. Just You and me talking, right? No clients on the call. But that's going to send the wrong message. So then once they narrow it down, ask them what their deal breakers are. I emphasize that they've already invested time and money they're not going to get back, and just ask directly, are you willing to walk away just because they won't repair a 6-inch piece of tile? I mean, and if they say yes, they've shown their true colors, have they not? And you might just say, really? Okay. In that kind of response may jar them into reality, but they need to be faced with the stark realization that they're losing this house based on a stupid repair that they can do themselves. And do not hear me that this is me telling you to go fix their problem for them. A 6-inch broken piece of tile is not your problem. Now, if you have someone that can come over and fix it real quick, great. But do not go out of your way. And what I always say, spend $10 on a $5 problem. This is their issue, not yours. Right? And this might fall into the category of, I really don't want this house anyway, or I don't even want to move, but I'm trying to nitpick and just hope this all just goes away. This might be what's going on. So ask again. If you've gone through all this and say, okay, well, what does a win-win look like for you? If they don't replace that tile, what do you want? If they do replace that tile, what do you want? Right? So here's your narrowed down list. And you went from 30 to 5. And I got the battle scars to prove it. What if they don't? Because their options are 3: yes to everything, no to everything, or a combination of the two. So let's talk about what the outcome might be. Does it really matter that the 6-inch tile isn't fixed? So let's talk about leasebacks and seller credits. So this is just money, right? So you're going to have to give somewhere to get something. So if the seller wants a leaseback, maybe you charge them for it. Or, if a seller wants a leaseback, they should be willing to pay for that convenience that the buyer is going to give them. And you know how I feel about leasebacks. I hate them for this exact reason, because they don't want them for free. But if the buyer is gracious enough to let the seller stay in a home that they no longer own and are no longer emotionally or financially invested in, I'd make them pay. And if they don't want to pay, and that becomes a deal breaker for the seller, well, that'd be a shocker. But you've got to be able to then get something in return. Okay. As always, this all goes in paragraph 12. So just be careful that the buyer's lender will allow what they're asking for. And more importantly, make sure the buyer understands that if they ask for 12 grand and the seller said, yes, you can have 12 grand, but the lender said you only get 10 because of how much you put down and the kind of loan it is, that the buyer knows that 2 grand goes away. Right? Please be transparent. All right, so deal breakers. Simply ask your buyer, what would cause you to walk away from this deal? And just be forewarned, some of the stuff you hear is going to be so silly. Right? And so when it seems like the buyer is getting the short end of the stick, just ask them. And this can happen maybe in a multiple offer situation, or they do want a unique home and they finally found it and the seller's digging their heels in. Just say, look, man, I'm not you, but let's put this into perspective. In the big picture, are you getting most of what you want? like on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about what the seller's willing to give you? And when you move in and look back on this a year from now, is this going to matter? Is this going to matter? And negotiating on behalf of a buyer is always successful when you prepare them for what's ahead and ask them what success looks like to them. So that's probably about the third or fourth time I've mentioned that same point. Just ask them. Okay. Now, if in the rare occasion they do end up walking away, and by the way, it's not going to be one thing, it's going to be a bunch of stuff that's built up that they may have not have been as transparent with you as you wanted them to be, but it's never one thing. But if they do walk away, I would recap that experience and just say, hey, we're done with this. This is in the past. What are we doing different next time? What are we doing different next time? Because I'm not going through this again. This is what you're saying to yourself. I am not going through this again. So I need an indication from you, Mr. Buyer, that you're not going to create the same dysfunction that happened with this, right? So the role of communication. So be direct, clear, and concise in all of your interactions. Make this experience positive, even in the face of adversity, and never blame or speak ill of the seller or other agent. You know, it is what it is. They don't need your commentary about, yeah, that agent's brand new. You don't know what she's doing. I don't know why the seller's doing this. They're really very difficult to work with. Forget all that. Doesn't matter. Be positive. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Maintain professionalism, even in disagreements. And this is hard, but don't make your buyer feel ashamed or dumb for asking for what they want. You know, it's their lens they're looking through, and there's got to be a reason as to why they're asking for it. And follow up promptly just to maintain that momentum. There's nothing worse than having your client need to reach out to you and say, hey, did you hear back from the seller about my repair requests? And even if there's nothing to report, tell them I haven't heard every 12 hours. Right. And so listen, this is probably advice you'll never get from anybody else, but here's my follow-up to all of this. You are much better off speaking calmly and openly with the seller agent within reason. Now, don't overshare, but just so they don't think you have some hidden agenda. You know, and so say things like, yeah, my buyer really feels like the windows are important. You know, my buyer really feels like you know, painting the door black is really important. All right. It will go a long way. Now, you know, if your buyer's in I don't know, a unique situation, like they've lost their, well, not lost their job, but going through something personally, those aren't the things I'm talking about. But, you know, pick your battles. But I think that it's just much better to be transparent with the other side so that you can get to that win-win and that it appears to be more collaborative. So negotiating with sellers, find out what their true motivation is for selling, what their timeline is, and ask them, want me to tell you what you want to hear or what you need to hear? And this will open up the door for being completely transparent from this point forward. All right, have an outline for everything you're going to do for them. And then I would review with your seller what a buyer is going to typically negotiate. So if through conversation your seller mentions something, yeah, I've been meaning to get that driveway fixed, or you know, I noticed there is a cracked piece of tile in the entryway. I'm meaning to get that fixed. And so just point that out. Well, to some people that won't matter a lick, but to some it will. And your job is to not be offended. My job is to tell you about it and your job is to decide what to do with that information. But I'm just giving you a heads up that any defect in this home will be revealed. And then create a list of their deal breakers. Contrary to reality, especially if the home sits there long enough, sellers think that they can pass on every buyer. Another one's going to come along. Well, maybe not. Usually not with the same terms. So if you're a seller's agent, especially the higher price home it is, man, you got to hang on to a potential buyer like it's the last one coming. And so your sellers need to kind of think that way too. So I have examples of my own, but before I do that, does anybody have any unique situations that they want to share? Nobody?
I don't know if you guys can hear me because I'm driving. So can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I have a lot of unique circumstances. And so the one I'm working with right now is a seller, and they thought their home was worth a lot more than it was. And it took me a little bit to show them comps, and then it really took other buyers coming in and touring the home and telling them what all was wrong with the home, in their opinions, what all they needed to fix, for me to really explain this is what everyone's seeing and we have to price accordingly. And so now we are priced competitively, and I got 10 showings this week on that house, but it took someone else, like a buyer, saying no and why, and it took enough of those people for me to be able to explain that to them. So sometimes you just have to let, those people speak for the property too, because the seller sometimes has more of an emotional attachment than a value.
Right.
So it took a little bit. So I'm hoping to get this deal closed. It was an expired listing, and probably for that reason.
Well, that's interesting feedback, and I would say that you're lucky that that those tweaks resulted in more eyeballs to the listing, because that's normally not what happens, right? The first 2 weeks, first 3 weeks are critical, and then after that, sometimes doesn't matter what you do, that's fallen off people's radar. So that's great. And so to Summer's point, sometimes it takes someone, a third party, someone other than you. See, that's why we get bugged so much when we go see property by the seller agent that wants feedback. This is why they want it. This is why they want it. Because I mean, why else would they want it? If it's priced right and it's staged right, what do they care what you think? Well, it's because of the things that Summer mentioned. Anybody else?
Back in, I believe it was November, I had a transaction in which the home was being sold as is. And something came up in the inspection, and it was pretty major. It was foundation issues. And obviously, the quote that was given to the buyer was very high. So, what you were saying about being open and calm and honest to the other agent completely paid off, because even though she was very clear from the beginning, home is being sold as is, we're not going to give out any credits. When I came in with that approach, being very calm, nice, and approachable to her, and telling her, hey, well, I mean, the foundation has major issues. The quote is over 30 grand. We're not asking for the 30 grand, but are you guys willing to pitch in any sort of way? And gave them time to process. They came back and did half of it. So yeah, it's always nice to be able to just keep calm, be open, be honest, and kind of see where that leads you.
Yeah, and so that's a great example of a win-win because it was a compromise. No one side dug their heels in. And so be mindful and be hyper aware of those situations where the other side just simply isn't willing to give an inch. I just I think that's unfortunate. Um, so let me pose a couple of scenarios to you. So example one, this is a buyer. They were a referral client to you. So someone that knows you referred this buyer to you. You've met them once, done a buyer consultation. They've been receiving homes from you, and they're ready to go look. They don't want to sign a buyer's rep agreement. I can't believe there's a typo in here. And they're confused about why they have to pay your commission. Based on everything that we've gone through so far, what would be a good response?
About them being confused about why they have to pay commission, Brad?
Yeah, well, just so in the spirit of the subject of negotiation, when I mentioned earlier what some of those things might be, this is an example of a buyer that is about ready to go see a home, and you have to negotiate with them about the fact that they have to sign a buyer's rep agreement, and that buyer's rep agreement mandates that they possibly may be the ones paying your commission.
Got it. Ooh. I certainly wouldn't start by lowering my commission. I would probably tell them what all I have to offer to them and what I will be doing for them, and their home search. Um, and based on maybe a good offer, I would be willing to reduce my commission slightly if we have a decent offer. I don't even know if that's something that could work, but I would certainly not cut my commission up front.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yep. Go ahead.
sorry, I personally wouldn't take on that client if they're not willing to sign a representation agreement with me. I'm not going to waste my time with them. I mean, they don't see the value that I'm going to bring up front. I don't see a way around it, honestly.
Yeah.
Not if they don't sign that agreement. Heck no.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the number one issue. I mean, if you're willing to work with me, I'm willing to work with you, but you have to have something in writing and to cover your back.
Definitely.
So I would say for this section, I work a lot with buyers, and whenever they have to sign that buyer's rep agreement, they're very confused now. And so in reality, if you go back, however long, a lot of buyers reps would add that to their offer, and you'd be signing it, but right when you make your offer. So I explained to them now, this prevents lawsuits. This explains the duties and responsibilities that I have to you. These are the requirements that I will be doing, like this is required by law, one, and I like to follow the law. But also, it sets out the roles and responsibilities of what we each have. When you have representation, you're actually hiring an agent to work for you on your behalf. And so I present to you all of these additional property research and resources. We do comparables. We discuss pricing and value. We take time to get to know you. And that way, we're not wasting time touring homes that you might not be interested in. Then whenever we move on to contracts, I help you go through the contract. We can go line by line if it's been a while or you're new to it. I explain to you the process of buying a home. And then I don't just sign a contract and get you in and leave you. I stay with you through the process. Through every step of the contract, I'm going to be there to answer questions. I'm going to show up when you show up. I'm going to show up when you don't show up. I'm going to make sure that what you truly want in a property is going to be the result and that you're happy with it. And then after that contract and after that closing, I'm going to stay with you in the long run. and I'm going to make sure that you got your exemption set up for the property that you need to, and I will be a constant resource for you. So whenever it comes to paying the commission, I highlight in yellow that first, I seek to procure the commission from the seller's side. If I'm not able to procure all of the commission within the seller's side, there are other ways to negotiate the contract terms to get that commission set forth. And so that is a lot of the ways about how I go about my initial communication with people.
Thank you.
And then they have more understanding and they say, well, what if the other agent's only offering, like a certain commission, like two, who pays the other one? And I say, well, we can try to negotiate that into additional sellers' concessions, or we can discuss that, how that looks on your closing statement. And so that way, when you get to the closing table, you're fully aware of where that money is going and that you see the value through the transaction that I have provided you. One of those being a pricing strategy advisor, the other is being a negotiation expert to negotiate the best contract terms for you, thus earning that commission.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and all three answers are right, because there's three different viewpoints, three different personalities, and three different approaches. And so I agree with each one of those. I think that sometimes a client is just dead set. I'm not gonna sign it. I'm not gonna agree to pay your commission. Well, in today's day and age, good luck. They're not going to find anybody else that is going to agree to that. But some people, to Summer's point, they just need some convincing and understanding really about what how that looks. I've heard another person say, regardless of what this document says, my first concern is getting you a house. We'll worry about the payment later. So. Well, what about this one? So buyer, hang on. Relationship is strong with a buyer, and they've been easy to work with so far. Now it comes time to put in an offer, and they want to offer $50,000 below the list price. What would you say? First thing I would say is, well, how'd you come up with that number? And after I had shown them the comps that reflect what every other similar home had gotten. Anybody have any other thoughts?
I could go. One of the things I would approach is, since we have a good relationship, is saying, how badly do you want this home, right?
Right.
Because if they're on a scale of 0 to 10 and they say 2, then that offer makes sense. If they're saying 9, then I say, do you really think this is, if you were the seller, is this something, and these are the comps, would you accept this offer? And just make them take a look at it from the seller's side and say, especially if it's a seller's market.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the things I would start with and approach it that way.
I like that. I'm a big fan of scale of 1 to 10, because that truly forces them to assign a rating to something, and then it gives you an insight as to where their mindset is at. So what about this? First time home buyer. Offer is accepted. Inspections done. Buyer reviews the report. Foundation, roof, hot water heater, HVAC are all brand new. Inspection report reveals 30 other minor defects of things that are cosmetic. Buyer wants you to ask the seller to fix all of them. What do you guys think?
When it comes to, go ahead. I don't want to take it up. Go ahead, whoever it was.
No, I think
I'll just I just tell them that's way too much. Okay, not really, but
That's what you want to tell them,
that's
Monique.
what I want to say is that is way too much. But the foundation, roof, water heater, HVAC. So I always tell my buyers from the beginning, there's a top five or six that we're always looking at. And I also tell them that when we're going to a pre-existing house, the inspector's job is to find something. He's going to find a whole bunch of things. Some can be cosmetic. It's going to be wear and tear. Someone's lived there. So I just kind of give them that scenario. And then I'll tell them, let's check the things that are brand new. That's great and amazing. What other things can you would be you need them to take care of that you can't take care of? Is it something that's like, I just need to paint this, or it's a doorknob? How serious is it to get us from option period to you being almost to closing?
That's great. Ariana?
Well, I was just
Brenda,
sorry, Sadir. I was just gonna say when it comes to repairs, obviously the 30 would be too much, but make kind of just tell them, hey, well, are you willing to let's ask for some sort of credit? Maybe it won't cover all 30 of them, but it will cover part of them. And if that gives them peace of mind, you can take care of those once you're moved in with whatever credit we come up to. So that's kind of my point of view when it comes to that.
Yep.
makes sense.
Seller credit's good, Ariana. Yeah.
What, one of the things is people assume that when repairs are asked for, that they're going to be done to their level of satisfaction. So if they're going to paint, uh, I can ask this buyer, I said, do you just want them to use some cheap paint just to make you happy? Or would you rather have it quality work done by your guy and make it, superlative to you instead of just accepting some mediocre job because this is something that you asked the seller to do?
That is such a good point, because how many times have we asked for repairs, they get done, and receipts are provided that prove it, and you're looking at that repair and thinking, who did this? And so a lot of times it might not be, the interpretation of the standard is going to be different.
And that's exactly why I asked for credits, because everybody's standards are different.
Yeah.
Everybody different opinions and so on and so forth. So I mean, I think that's a happy medium for everybody.
Well, and I think what also plays into the inspection thing and quote unquote repairs is that, especially if they're a first time home buyer, they have no earthly idea how to get those done. And so maybe offer to make that part of it a little bit easier, and that might fix it as well. But don't forget about the strategy of, hey, you got 30 here. I'm going to ask you to go back, and you may come back with the same 30, but if you can look over these and whittle it down, that would probably be helpful. So, all right, last one. Seller. Seller's your next door neighbor. You've known him for 10 years, although you think you have. Seller wants $40,000 more than the comp support. Seller wants a 2-week free lease back. So Summer kind of had an example of this. How'd you come up with a number? Like, to y'all's point earlier, what you want to say is, well, what are you hiring me for? You think you can get 40 grand more. Here's what the market tells you. All
well,
right.
Brad, because Zillow tells them that's the value of it. They are experts now in.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And now on the lease back, I would say, first of all, 2 weeks is excessive. Do you really need all that time? And free is probably pushing it, because as we all know, in the lease back form, if they agree to paying, even if it's $10 a day for 2 weeks, that money is paid in advance and not refunded if they leave early. Now, I'm guessing they don't know that, they just want something free. I mean, hey, it's my house. I want to stay here. Well, no, it's not, first of all. And second of all,
We are assuming that it's a buyer's market here.
yeah,
If it's a seller's market, maybe not such a big deal. But the other thing is, I would like to do is give them a choice. Do you want to sell it fast or do you want more money? Because if you want more money, you might be waiting for 3 years. If you want to sell it fast, maybe that's
right.
you go with the comps.
Exactly. Yeah. And they all want to sell it fast for the most amount of money, but they throw out these things that are counter to that. So, well, good. Well, that was it. Anybody have anything else?
Brad, this was amazing, as always. One of the things that perhaps you can cover in a future session is, how do you go through a negotiation in the sense of, what are techniques you can use? How do you? I mean, there are books and people do PhDs on negotiations and stuff. So, can we go more into a process where we do a little role play or something, and we try to negotiate out of the best scenario if possible or something, and we can learn from that.
Yeah, and I always think about role playing beforehand, but um, I, in my experience, they're never really realistic. And so that's why I approach it from I want to give you language to tell people in certain situations, and then through those examples, I wanted everyone to kind of self-discover what they would do. Now, I will say this. Um, NAR has a designation for a negotiations expert. And, no one's going to do it better than NAR or TXR. So I would look into that and I would go in person instead of doing it online. Um, but and it's funny, you should mention that. Before this session, I looked on YouTube because I was going to suggest, because of that reason,
Mhm.
go on to YouTube and let's see if we can find like a softer approach to negotiation. Couldn't find any. And
Wow.
I put in multiple versions of search terms, and the common denominator were you know very aggressive techniques, and that wasn't the message that I wanted to communicate. But um, the negotiation expert designation is a good one to look into.
I would agree with Brad. In my previous career, I managed professional engineers and I required all of them to go through a class called CRAS negotiating. It was like $700 or $800, which is expensive, but it just it took the pointed technical details and made them human for these guys. And it's the same thing here. You just have to you have to take the edge off things and make it human to human negotiation.
Right, right. Good point. Well, and that can be difficult if you're an agent that is transactionally based. If you're not relationship based and um, don't want to go deeper, and all you care about is the closing, you're going to get frustrated real quick. All right. Well, we're over our time. So I told you we were going to be over our time. So I apologize, um, but I hope it was worth it. And I'll send out the recording, and we'll plan to meet next Thursday. And as always, if y'all have any questions, just give me a shout.
Great class.
Take care,
Thanks,
y'all.
Brad.